we're going to work in something called a gradient mesh tool. I really do like this tool. Let me show you some examples here, or one example anyway. This is an example of a gradient mesh, and incidentally, I am in the document called redtomato.ai. That's gradient mesh. Now, a gradient mesh creates very realistic gradients, almost photo quality. That's a flower. Took a couple hours to make. If you go to the word View on the pull-down menu and go down to Outline, you can see all the pieces of that. Crazy. Let me turn that back on again. That is a gradient mesh. Now, in designing in Adobe Illustrator, I think we all develop a style, and I would like to think of myself as a classic illustrator. And I don't mean I'm classic, okay? I'm not classic. I like classical music, but I'm not classic. But I draw in a classic style. For example, here's a tomato. Okay, and here's a tomato, these two. The one on the left, I mean, these are both classic Illustrator styles. That's the one on the left. Took me about 15 minutes to do. It's only 3 colors. It's black, red, and it's green, solid colors. The one on the right has basically 3 colors, the reds, the stem, and the black of the leaves. That's about it. I mean, each one took about 15 minutes to do. But they are different, aren't they, than something, say, like that. Quite impressive. Let me turn these off here. Now, we are going to do a tomato. You might call it tomato. I call it tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. Tomatoes more realistic than the ones I showed you using the gradient mesh tool. Now, let's start. I've got one other thing I'm going to show you here, and it's the top piece to the tomato. This piece, that took about 15 minutes to do. It's not gradient mesh, and we're talking about the gradient mesh tool. So I'm going to go into the layer, it's blank, called tomato right here. Pick up your elliptical tool here, ellipse I should say. Let me turn this off for now. We don't need it. Draw a nice big ellipse. I'm going to hold the Alt key down, and that's the Alt key and Windows option on a Mac, and draw something about like that. I'm going to leave the color as white so we can see it. Now, tomatoes aren't that perfect, so let's pick up our direct selection tool and start messing around here. Coming up to the top right here, and I'm going to pull this one on this side in maybe just a little. I'll hold the Shift key so it doesn't drift. And maybe pull this one actually out just a little bit. Come over here, maybe give this one here. Every time I do this, I do it differently. Okay, bring that in, and then bring this one up a little bit, kind of to flatten out this piece over here. That's a little bit too much. Let me bring that back down. Let me come over to this one. And what do your tomatoes look like? That's all we're doing here. And maybe bring that down just a little bit. Okay, that's my idea, at least right now, of what the tomato is going to be, but we're not done. Let's go ahead and pick up our regular selection tool, click on it, and give it just a little bit of a rotate, maybe a little bit this way, like that. Okay, now we have an anchor point here. I want to add a couple more anchor points up here, actually one on either side of this. So I'm going to pick up my pen tool, and I'm going to wait till it sees a plus sign up there, so I have to have it selected. Say right about there, and right about there. I'm going to pick up my direct selection tool and pick up that one in the middle. See if I can find it. Sometimes it's easier to do it this way. There it is. And I'm going to pull that one in just a little bit. Kind of like the indentation at the top of the tomato. Okay? Now, next, let's fill it with a color. Now, I do have over here some colors for you. And this one right here, make sure you have the fill here, and that's a nice bright red. Tomato red. Now it's time for the gradient tool. It's right over here. Click, just about in the middle, right about here. Just go ahead and click. That's the gradient mesh. Now, the gradient mesh works this way. Each one of the points that we create basically is a place where I can put paint, and then it will spread out until it finds another point to interact with. Now, let's do this. Once I've got it selected like that, I can pull it down, which I want to do, kind of bring it down like, to about here. Pick up your direct selection tool. This is easier to work with. What I'm going to do now is, if I pick up this point right here, I want to kind of smooth this one out. So I'm going to bring it out. So I'm trying to make it fit the contour. How about that? Something like that. And maybe just a little bit lower by dragging it down. Okay, I'm happy. Now I'm happy. Next, go back to the gradient mesh tool I want you to click right on the line right about here. And we create another gradient mesh, a point that we can change, and maybe another one right about here, just like that. Come up here and click one right about here, one down here toward the bottom, and then split the difference and put one here and one here. The more you have, the more control you have. Now we need to get into controlling those areas in terms of color. Now I do have a lighter shade over here, you see it? I'm going to go to my direct selection tool because to me it's just easier selecting points with that than it is selecting them with this. Okay, that's just me. If I come to, say, this one over here, let's start right here. Click on that one. Now watch what happens when I click here. See how it lightens the area up? It's spreading the color out until it hits the red up here. Everything is red except that one right there. Now I can come over again. Let me come down, say, to this one and maybe do that same thing to start lightening up that one area. And maybe actually up here too. Let's try this. We can always change it later if we feel like we're going a little bit too far. Now let's select this one right here and see what happens when we give it a lighter color. Kind of like that. Move around it, find out where the reflections are, and begin changing them. Now anytime you want to, if we deselect it, we can kind of see what's going on right now. That actually doesn't look all that bad so far. Now down on the bottom, let's go back in Selected. Down here, I think I want that area darker because it's going in toward the bottom. And I'm going to go into and move over my color here, my color panel. I'm going to change that into Show Options. And I'm going to go into HSB. Okay, now make sure you have this one right here selected. And then come into, say, right here and move that in a little. See how it's going to darken it down there? Just give it a little bit of character. Now we could do the same thing on the sides. See, that's how you begin to develop that three-dimensionality. I'm going to shift-click on a couple of these and then maybe try that again. And in this case, let's go ahead and, actually let's do this. Let's use one of our colors over here and then darken it up. You want to give it that sense of having a boundary on the edges. Now we could keep this up. We only have so much time per lesson. But play around with it. Go back into it. Maybe even get to this one here and say, I want that one lighter, or I want to change the color. We could change it to this one right here, which actually is lighter. And we begin creating a tomato. Now, pick up your ellipse tool and give me a ellipse down here. I'm going to hold the Alt key, Alt and Windows Option on the Mac, and give me something about like that. I do have right here a gradient to use. Go ahead and click that button. And once we have it like this, go into your gradient options and change the aspect ratio to about a 40. So it does that. Make sure, go to the word object on the pull-down menu and go into send to back. And then let's pick up our selection tool and let's move it underneath, maybe something like that. And use your arrow keys if you want to. Okay, one more thing, just for now. I mean, you could spend more time on this. Go into our layers and select topper, turn that on. And let's put our topper right here. Actually, we can do one more thing. Go back into your direct selection tool and let's get up here and click right on that one and let's make that one darker. Yeah, okay, now let's go ahead, actually pick the regular selection tool for this. And let's put that right there. There you go. A kind of realistic tomato, or tomato, whichever you choose, courtesy of Gradient Mesh. It is one amazing tool.